Sound off. Brilliant. So good evening. My name is Paul Bailey, and this evening with Andriana, we're going to talk a little bit about how do you design for blind dinosaurs with sausage fingers. We're going to explain that at some point as we go through the talk. But essentially, it's about ensuring that the products and services that we create work for everybody. First, a couple of introductions. So my name is Paul. I'm actually head of design for an agency called SPARCK. I'll explain a little bit about what they are and who BGSS are in a second. But I'm joined by the lovely Andriana. Evening, Andriana. How are you?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Good, thanks.
Yeah, we're all enjoying looking at the back of your head, so we can kind of see you. If you turn around and wave, that will be awesome. There's a few waves.
Yeah, there they are.
Yay! Thank you. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about SPARCK then, first of all. So who are SPARCK? What are they about? What do they do? So we're essentially the design and innovation consultancy. We're kind of an internal capability for the largest independent IT consultancy in the UK called BGSS. But we've now got international offices, including a brilliant office right here in the middle of New York. And we should have the lovely Amanda and Eric, if you can make yourself known. I don't know if you can wave or do a dance. We can't see you, but we're going to assume that you're doing that at the minute. They're here in real life to represent us. So if you've got any questions following this talk, feel free to go over to them and ask them, and they'll happily answer your questions or direct you towards us for further conversations. But let's talk a little about the GDS. Do you want to just put your hand up if you know what GDS stands for? I can't see many hands going up. So let's kind of talk about GDS and Government Digital Standard. So what is it, right? So essentially, this is a standard that in the UK, the government use to assess products and services, right? So they've got these 14 points. And if you want to create a service which is used by the general public in the UK, there's an assessment panel which comes and has a look at your project at various stages of various kind of points within its life cycle and assesses whether you're actually meeting the standard or not. Before I started working for SPARCK about four and a half years ago, most of the work that I did was in the kind of corporate sector. And I always thought government has been a bit like, behind, what we're doing in tech, and we were doing the kind of, fintech. It was all like cutting edge or leading stuff. Like, yeah, this is great. And then when I joined SPARCK, we're going to do this project and it's going to be working with the government. I was thinking, oh, okay, we'll see how this goes. And then I got introduced to the Government Digital Service Standard. I thought, wow, actually, this is pretty good, right? Number one, understand users and their needs. Okay, that seems like a good place to start. If you're going to apply a human-centered lens to the type of work that we're doing, why don't we start with what people actually need? So anyway, the service standard is in place. It's used on all government-based projects in the UK. But why? Why is it used? Why does it even exist? So that's what we're going to start with a little bit. Is like, why was it even created? Right? Why does this thing even have a place in government? Well, for that, we have to go back a while. I guess in internet kind of terms, this is like eons, right? It's 12 years ago. A lot's changed since then, but I don't know, like, if you remember what the internet looked like back then. But in the UK, if you wanted to use any public service across the UK, this is where you would go, right? So if you wanted to get a passport, if you wanted to get a driving license, if you wanted to apply for some kind of tax rebate, everything that you were going to do, you would come here, right? And it was pretty bad, right? It wasn't easy, it wasn't user focused, there's information everywhere, it's really disorganized, chaotic, it's horrible, really horrible experience. And the Gov had all these different challenges, right? They had all these different agencies working on all these different websites and all these different problems with page redirects and all these kind of massive kind of issues. At the same time, they had these really big IT projects that were failing. They're spending all this money on these huge kind of nationwide projects that should impact millions of people, only to find actually they were delivering no value at all. So they were failing completely. So at that point, on the 14th of October in that year, a forward-thinking woman called Martha Lane Fox, who was a lastminute.com founder, suddenly had this kind of brainwave that actually maybe we shouldn't think about it in terms of the internet and websites, and maybe we should start thinking about it in terms of services. And actually, she kind of wrote a letter that started a whole chain of events, which led into the UK government's digital strategy, which in essence GDS kind of spun out of. And a big focus of that was just applying some human-centered design principles, right? You probably know all these around, you know, is it something that people want? Can we actually do it technically? And as a business or a government entity, is this something feasible, right? And in many ways, it's just about making sure that not only do you build the right things, but you build them right, and you understand the needs of people and the possibilities of tech and requirements for success when you actually go out and start on these kind of large nationwide scale projects. So after that, quite quickly, the Gov website became this, which is slightly better than what they had before. It's still not great. You're still kind of wondering a little bit, why am I looking at a map of the Earth or whatever that is? But again, the kind of government site was iterated, and quickly it became this. And then today it kind of looks something like this. And you know what? It's probably not the most exciting design in the world, but it's functional, right? And it gets stuff done. So if you want to complete your tax rebates, or you want to find out how to get the tree outside your house removed, or if you want to renew your passport, you can come to this website, and it's structured in a way which actually makes it easy for you to do so. So what have we learned? I mean, just one step before we kind of move on to this, I think with that GDS type framework, one of the interesting things is it's been something that now other governments across the world have kind of borrowed a little bit from. So I think in Canada, they've recently released their GDS equivalent, I think quite recently, but Germany is about to release one. But over in places like Australia, they've kind of lifted and shifted it pretty much and said, you know, thank you very much, you've done some great work there. We'll build on it, and we'll just kind of implement it over here and kind of keep improving it. But it is something that other government bodies across the world have actually recognized that it's actually been really effective and have kind of learned and borrowed those lessons. So, but what we're here to do this evening, I guess, to share what we've learned. So we've done lots of GDS projects at Spark. We have to go through all these different kind of formal assessments, talk about why we've done the work that we've done and how we've done it, and how we've made sure that it's inclusive, and it's not only to people that have accessibility needs, but also to people that actually maybe aren't digitally enabled. You know, there's still something like 5 million people, I think, in the UK that don't have any internet access. So how do they access these essential services? So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we've learned, I guess, over the last, I don't know how many years, many years. Hand over to you, Andriana.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, so I've been working at Spark and BJSS for the last year and a half, and I've worked on about 4 or 5 government and national health system projects. And I've got 3 tips to share with you, 3 sort of main topics that I feel are really important to share. And the first one being be inclusive. So not only with our users, when I say inclusive, it's not about just the reach, but it's also about the way we run our projects. So being inclusive of the team and the clients, the other designers in the organization, and industry field experts. One of the main things I learned is that there's no such thing as an edge case. So for example, when we were doing a prioritization meeting in one of our projects, and we're discussing MVPs and whether we should launch with different versions of the sites. We did some research into some of the use cases about mobile use versus desktop and tablet, and we found that 85% was using mobile, and the discussion came up of should we prioritize something like that. But then when we took the 25% and translated it into how much that actually is, it's actually about 16 million people that you're disregarding. So being inclusive is really important, because understanding the reach is a really important part of that. Wonder if you could go to the next slide, Paul. One more. So another really important thing that we learned was don't generalize. And this is a lot about, you know, being inclusive, but it's also really understanding the people, and the different types of people have different needs. So you have to be really mindful of how you describe them, or how you're asking them to share information about themselves. So you have to be inclusive of anything that has to do with gender, age, race, sexual orientation, health conditions, and you definitely have to do a lot of user research. So on the right-hand side, I know the screen's a little bit light at the moment, you'll see there are some examples of some questions we've had to phrase in specific ways so that they're really inclusive of people. And one of the pieces of work we're doing for mental health during pregnancy, which we worked really closely with clinicians and industry field experts to understand the topic and the area, because we didn't know anything about that, was we had to use really inclusive language. And for example, when we spoke about women giving birth, we tried to make it use the language like people giving birth. And we try to include their partners in that. So in the highlighted section, we've got if you or your partner are feeling overwhelmed. And we tested this with users, and it tested really, really well. And it was one of the things that stood out to them really strongly. So that's one thing that we learned, that being inclusive of clinicians and industry field experts was really important. Then on the next slide, I've kind of highlighted that you also have to learn and be inclusive of experts. And one of the things that the system, GDS systems and the NHS system already does really well is they've got a lot of experience in testing for accessibility, and they've done loads and loads of previous research that covers this, which cover hearing, vision, motor, and cognitive. And one of the other projects we had was we had to do some work on adding filters on a page, which was a simple product design task, I thought in the beginning, where you would just add filters to be able to help people access services for alcohol support. And my first intuition was, okay, we'll just make it like most marketing websites where you have your filters on your left-hand side and you filter through them and you get the content on the center of the page. And we took this to a design crit within the NHS, where other NHS designers had been working on filters for a year and a half. And I showed them this and they were like, oh, but we've tested this and it didn't really test well on mobile. It wasn't really accessible to screen readers. And they shared so many insights on how filters would work for such a diverse audience and be really inclusive of everyone. And on the right-hand side, we understood that actually the filters needed to be on the top of the page and they needed to be expandable. So there were lots of UI elements and learnings that came from this. But if we didn't have that design crit and we didn't have all those that input, we wouldn't have known all these things and we wouldn't have been able to launch the product we did as quickly. And going on to the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what these systems look like. So they start off on an atomic level of simple buttons, typography, and so on. And I know many of you might probably know a lot about design systems, but within these government sections and the styling that they do, they start turning into pages and templates that have pre-established use cases, and they can be reused, which is really useful because there's a lot of knowledge sharing. It's really efficient and it saves you a lot of time. The second tip I would say about designing for public sector would be to keep it simple. And if you go on to the next two slides, the first thing you have to do is just consider everything that's on the page and make sure that it definitely has to be there. So coming from more of a UI background, I was in the beginning very wanting to sort of look at adding pictures, icons, color blocks, and making the layouts interesting. And I soon learned that people have very different interpretations of imagery. And the page on the far left-hand side, which has all the images accompanied with some text, was there was some very different interpretations from people on what those images meant. They didn't even read the words. And after testing that, we realized that actually the page that's really stripped back, that only has the words and makes the users read those words, was the most successful one. So always make it simple, kind of unlearn all the things you've learned, and treat it like you're learning from the users, and don't make any assumptions. But one thing that we did learn was that actually on the right hand side you might see an example of different skin conditions on different skin tones. We learned that when we showed something that was really informational to users and it was helping them make a decision, so there a visual or photograph was really needed. And by including the different skin tones, people could relate to it more regarding our audience. And that goes back to the first tip, which was being inclusive. Then the last and third tip, which would be keep it clear and direct. So with all the government work we've been doing, there's often as designers we've learned and we've read books and we hear these things like, oh, a journey is not successful if it's not done in 3 clicks and so on. But with government work, you don't have customers. You're not speaking to customers. You're not selling anything or luring people into buying anything. You're giving them information, or you're helping them complete a journey, complete something and achieve something. So it may be an application. And we realized that, and we've learned that one question at a time is really important for people, because there's a lot of cognitive overload. And whether that question is that task about maybe applying for a passport has to happen in 20 steps, then it needs to be 20 steps. So you can't apply things like the 3-click rule. And the other thing we need to keep in mind is that you need to keep things really clear and direct, and that's a lot about regarding the language you use. So on the next slide I've got something that's saying like no need to say please, and that is because not because we're being rude or impolite, but it's purely because you're being very direct and you're just giving instructions. And a lot of the work we do is about content and how you say things. So for example, you need to be able to speak to people, and the reading level needs to be that of a 9-year-old. So you wouldn't say use complicated words or use acronyms. You wouldn't say something like you can access these services through your GP. You would put it really plainly, and you would just say you can get help from a nurse or a doctor. So it makes it really clear to people what you're doing. And how have we done this? And one of the things that's been really useful through our journey of doing all these projects and learning from all these different pieces of works that we've been doing for the GDS is that as a product designer, on the next slide, I have 2 examples of 2 prototyping kits. And what these allow you to do is make really fast prototypes using those design systems I showed earlier, in HTML, and you're able to iterate and test them really fast. So I think in agile methodologies, there's this phrase called fail fast. But I think with the work we've been doing, if you can iterate and test fast, that can really act to your advantage. And what's great about the prototyping kits tools is that they're accessible so they can be tested for users with screen readers, and that it's all in HTML. So it's really great to have these tools and to be able to use them and work with them going forward. And I think now Paul's going to be showing you what some of these look like in an actual case study.
Oh yeah, so we've not got to the sausage fingers bit yet.
Yes, sausage fingers.
So I'm going to wrap things up. quite quickly. But before we do, I just wanted to share with you a very quick case study. And this is based on a government agency project with the UK government. This is with the agency called the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, and they're responsible for keeping people safe on Britain's roads, and they conduct and oversee all driving tests that are done in the UK. And they had a bit of a challenge in that they had a paper-based process for actually conducting driving tests. And there's something like 1.8 million of these tests are conducted every year. And all of those tests were being processed manually on paper. So they had this kind of challenge of how do we digitize this experience? And a key part of this experience was actually the test was conducted in a moving vehicle. So we had to figure out how to not only introduce a digital device to replace this paper-based kind of system, but how could we design it in a way that didn't introduce an element of risk into a moving vehicle where somebody was still maybe having to control it if they were conducting the test. So the test probably works a little bit differently to how you do tests in the US, but I think you'll see, hopefully, best case scenario, I've got a very short video that we're going to play that will give you an overview of the project, and hopefully it'll give you a bit of an insight into what that test looked like and some of the activities that we did on it. So fingers crossed, let's see if it works.
DVSA is a road safety organisation. Our strategy is about keeping people safe on Britain's roads. We want that service to be modern, and this is a journey that we've started now with a test result capture using iPads.
When I became a driving examiner, I couldn't believe how much paper we used and how much paper we wasted.
All that paper needs to be stored in the driving test centre for 2 years as well. There's a high error rate where we can make easy mistakes.
We also had a lot of repetitive writing, a lot of postage. It didn't really work. It was an old system that we made work. We've been working with driving examiners from the start.
We had an early adopter network around the country, so every area, every test centre had a contribution to make.
We had twice monthly conference calls where we discussed any feedback that we had.
It got everybody on board because our feedback was taken into account as well, which was nice.
What really mattered is the 1,600 driving examiners out there were given the opportunity to see it, play with it and give us their opinion. They're the people that really mattered on this project.
We've provided a lot of training to the examiners. We've got examiners who are, in their own words, are blind dinosaurs with sausage fingers. So we need to develop an app that they can feel confident in using.
We brought the iPads out before the digitisation had taken place, and so people got some degree of familiarity.
By doing things like that, we turned the ship around from, I don't want to change from paper, as to, when can I have it? I want it now.
The first test that we used the app was a little bit nervous, to be honest.
All my colleagues were very jealous that they were still writing things out and I was not.
I would definitely not want to go back to paper. In the mornings, I can just sit down and have a cup of tea until I go out on my first test.
This is a fantastic legacy project that's taken away 20 years of old ways of working and brought us into the 21st century.
To be involved in the project and be now using them is a brilliant thing. I'm glad to have been a part of it.
So I'm not sure if that worked or how much of the audio you got from that, but hopefully, yay, it worked. Thanks, Brian. So some kind of, let's talk about the outcomes first of all, right? Because that's what we're focused on. The big thing for me was that we get 100% user adoption. So through our early kind of phases of research, what we found is that I think there's something like 60% of the users that we were actually creating this service for were aged 50 plus, and they were predominantly male. They've been in the role for a long time, and suddenly somebody was coming along and saying, we're going to digitize everything, and it's like, but I'm quite comfortable and confident doing it in this whole paper-based way. Why would I want to do that? But there's some things that we did, I think, and I'll explain in a minute, that really helped to overcome that and involve people in the process of actually co-designing this thing. So for me, one of the biggest kind of outcomes is that we got everybody adopted this new way of working. But at the same time, we reduced all this kind of waste in time and cost annually. And because the data was then stored in the cloud in a secure way, we had live data analytics that could be looked at and MI information pulled out from, which helped the agency to actually manage the service more effectively. And at the same time, we looked at things like accessibility and digital inclusion and actually improve the service overall. So just coming back to some of the points that Andriana, when we talk about being inclusive, I think when SPARCK talk about it, we talk about it in a very broad sense, right? So it's about the team to start off with. So it's not about the designers sitting in a corner producing beautiful screens and then lobbing it over the fence to the developers and hoping that something happens. We get everybody involved, right? So as part of GDS, part of the Government Digital Service Standard, one of the principles is around getting everybody out on research every 6 weeks. So everybody in the team, whether you're a researcher or whether you're a technical architect or a BA, doesn't matter. You know, you take part in some kind of research session where you're actually involved. And I think we often get the team involved as well in things like the show and tell, like a regular kind of playback of what we've learned and how we've done it. And it's very much kind of team effort. And there were some things on this project that we did, which are a pretty good example, I think, of that, where, you know, at the beginning of the project, we recreated a test center in our office. So we wanted the whole team to start to feel empathy for users and candidates in this kind of situation. And we also sent everybody out into an actual test center to do some kind of ethnographic research really early on. And what really stuck with that team throughout that whole project was that experience, because they came back and they shared with you their experience of seeing, you know, a young mum burst into tears when she passed the test, because it now meant that she could drop her kid off or go to a new job, and somebody else, a teenager who got angsty because it failed for like the 6th time and nearly reversed into a lamppost, or the, you know, somebody phoning up because they thought they ran over a cat or something. Those kind of stories, they were quite humorous, I guess, most of the time, or emotional, but they stuck with the team, and it kind of took them from being just about empathy and actually having some compassion to actually want to change that service and make it better. But there's a stakeholder element as well, right? So this is a Lego Scrum activity. I've put the URL down there because I think this is a great activity. But if you've got stakeholders that are new to Agile and are new to kind of the Scrum way of working, which this particular client was, there are things that you can do to help them understand what you're doing rather than just doing it to them or with them. You can actually involve them in that process and help them to understand the value of working in this kind of smaller, iterative, fast way, as opposed to, you know, disappearing for 6 months and producing a specifications document that nobody's ever going to read or ever look at. So yeah, there's some value, I think, in bringing stakeholders along on that journey, getting them involved in research sessions, you know, just not just playing it back to them, actually getting them involved and getting them to come along to some of these sessions where you typing and testing things with users. And this is the key thing for me, right? So the reason this service was successful was because we designed for driving examiners with driving examiners. We went into the places where they work, and we did workshops with them. We took pieces of paper in and we asked them, you know, how might we do this, or what should this look like? And in a way, you know, the value of these sessions wasn't actually the outputs, which were often like scrappy, and it was the insights that we found and the stories that actually came out of some of those discussions, which really gave us an in-depth understanding of what their needs were and what we needed to do to actually create a product that which worked specifically for them. One of the key things around the Government Digital Service Standard, I think we mentioned this a little bit already, is accessibility and digital inclusion, right? Is a key part of the work from day one. So one of the key things that we had right from the beginning of the project was accessibility was part of our definition of done, right? So if it not been tested and it wasn't part of that process, then it wasn't done. But some other great things I think that actually come out of GDS are that there is a whole bunch of things around accessibility, and most projects have to go through some kind of external accessibility audit. So your work is you can't mark your own homework, somebody else has got to check it. And you have to produce an accessibility statement now as well, which all government sites should have. So even if they don't fully meet the levels of compliance that are required, they have to have a statement to explain what's wrong and what they're going to do about it and when they're going to do it by. So there's a kind of drive to actually make those changes. But there's something about bringing the team along on this as well. So in that top corner there, on the top right, you can see that we did a visual impairment workshop, and we found that a quite high percentage of the users, because of their age, had a variety of visual impairments. So again, we wanted to build empathy in the team. So there's a set of lenses that you can get that come in a box, which essentially simulate different types of visual impairments. And we actually sat down and did a workshop with the team and got them all to try these different visual impairments and see if they could actually use the device, so that, again, they could have some kind of empathy with potential users that might have these types of conditions. Keep it simple. So this is where the kind of this talk idea comes from, I guess, really, is that we often start projects and we're looking for stories, right? We're looking for qualitative type kind of feedback, trying to understand users, and every now and then something comes out like this, where and this was because this particular person that we're interviewing had been in the job a long time, is coming near retirement, and he used to be a mechanic and he become a driving examiner, and he just came out with this quote, oh, you're gonna make this work, he's gonna have to work with blind dinosaurs with sausage fingers, and they're all having a laugh about it, but there was something in that, that quote that actually stuck with us for the rest of the project. And whenever we were making a design decision, we kind of asked, would that work for a blind dinosaur with sausage fingers? And immediately everybody in that team knew what that meant. So whether you're a designer or whether you're the delivery manager, they would all be asking that kind of question, which almost gave us some kind of focus for what it was that we were actually doing, and how to almost evaluate our own decisions, our own design decisions. We often keep the work really visible as well, so we keep it quite lo-fi. It's quite scrappy, but it means that we can iterate really quickly and actually change what we're doing, and actually bring the team and get the team involved in it as well. And these things often become kind of campfires for conversations and help to resolve problems and challenges really quickly. And finally, I guess it's about being clear and direct. I mean, one of the big challenges was, how do we make this work, right, in a moving vehicle? So we addressed that first, and we iterated and we tested and we iterated and tested. I think we did something like, I think it was about 100 in-car usability tests to simulate the full end-to-end test that a driving examiner would do, and we did it in all sorts of different types of conditions, and we did it with people who were very digitally confident and people that were digitally really not confident, and a massive amount of usability testing went into this project to ensure that once it went live, it was done in a safe way. But you get to a point, right? You've got all that qual, you've done your usability testing, you need to prove it. So if you don't agree up front what these measures are that you're going to be using on your project, then you're going to get to a point where you've got a load of assumptions, but you're not really sure if it's doing what you expect it to do. So we had a whole bunch of data dashboards and things that were built into this right from the beginning. So that's it. But if you would like to find out a bit more, we are going to share some links with the team there, with Brian. We'll send some links over. So there is actually a longer version of that case study that we showed you, which goes into it in more end-to-end. There's also the BGSS have got a really interesting podcast. One of those episodes, we talk a little bit about how human-centered design can add oomph to Agile. And we'll also send you some links to the design systems that Andriana mentioned as well. And just a final plug, we are hiring. So we have Amanda in there and Eric. So SPARCK are hiring here in New York. We have got product design roles. We'd love to chat to you about, tell you a little bit more. And we also have some engineering roles as well within BGSS. So if you're interested in either of those, please find Amanda and Eric. They're probably waving somewhere in the back frantically, although I can't see. Hopefully they are. Thank you very much. And if you've got some questions, yeah, fire away. We love talking about this stuff.